Next speaker is Chuck Mower. Chuck does not need any of this equipment. He's going to give a different type of talk. And Chuck was a leader last spring in our tour in Merrimack, New Hampshire. Chuck also makes Windsor chairs in his old barn, which is what, a couple hundred years old? An old red barn, and he has an old red brick house next to it in Merrimack, New Hampshire. So while Chuck is telling you a very interesting engineer joke, I'm going to be setting things up for him.
I hope to impart something interesting and useful to you. I was a technical education teacher for 12 years, and one of the programs that I had was called the 10-Point Engineering Plan. Now, I am not an engineer, but I nevertheless certainly understood what the general 10-point plan is for engineering. And of course, I got, technically, I guess you could call it industrial arts, what we used to know as industrial arts. So I get all kinds of kids in the class and so forth, various learning levels and so forth. So I would have to prepare them for the 10-point plan. And I would say that engineers are characterized by their clarity of purpose and their sobriety. So then I would always follow on with a little story about the French Revolution, where people were being executed on the guillotine. So the first guy up on the guillotine was the local priest. And it's great. So the executioner says to the priest, would you like to go face up or face down? He said, well, I'm a man of God. He said, I have nothing to fear from my Creator. He said, I will go out of this world facing up. Very well. He reaches up and he grabs the lever and he yanks it, and the blade comes screaming down and miraculously stops at his neck. He said, oh, Father, he says, I can't execute you twice. Your faith has saved you. You're free to go. So off goes the priest. Well, the next guy up was the town judge. And he says to the judge, would you like to go face up or face down? He said, well, he said, like my predecessor, he said, I'm a man of honor. I'm a man of the law. He said, I'll go facing my Creator. I'll go face up. Well, he said, very well, Your Honor. So he reaches up, grabs the lever, yanks it, blade comes screaming down again, and again stops miraculously at his neck. Oh, he said, Your Honor, he said, I can't execute you twice. Your faith has saved you. You're free to go. Well, the next guy up was an engineer. He said, would you like to go face up or face down? Well, he said, given the luck of the two guys before me, he says, I guess I'll go face up. He said, very well. So he reaches up and he grabs the lever, and the guy says, hey, wait a minute. I think I see the problem. Oh, gosh. So what I hope to impart to you today is the process by which early bricks were made, and I hope a great deal more. So Merrimack, where I live, was originally part of the colonies of the Bay Colony. It was Dunstable, and it was incorporated in 1693 or something like that. And it came all the way to the Souhegan River. And everything on the other side of the Souhegan River was wilderness. There was nothing there. And along...
These bricks are over 200 years old. They're handmade bricks, so that's what Chuck's going to talk about.
Water-struck bricks?
Well, we'll be talking about that, absolutely. So when people started to inhabit this part of the Merrimack River Valley, they were poor. And I want to tell you how poor they were. Have you ever felt poor? Do you know anybody that's poor? These settlers were poor. They largely were immigrants who were looking for a new life, and they were willing to settle the wilderness under certain conditions and so forth. So here they are, an agricultural-based society, and they are poor. Oh, how can we make more money? Just like all the rest of us, right? We want to make more money. We want to prosper. So they discovered that they had clay on their property. And so they began digging up the clay and attempting to make bricks because bricks were valuable. But they were also exceptionally laborious. And they already had their hands full just trying to make a cabin and grow their vegetables and so on and so forth. So that's where brickmaking began in the Merrimack River Valley. But the reason it began is because we had the Pleistocene, 4 distinct glacial encounters. And about 50,000 years ago, the Great Meltwater Retreat began, the end of the Pleistocene age. And rock and gravel were scoured across the New Hampshire landscape and down into Massachusetts and all the way down to Long Island. And as it retreated under the glacier, there were streams and rivers and sand and gravel and so forth. And it just scoured, just absolutely sandpapered the landscape. Whatever was here before the Ice Age, we have no knowledge of, simply because it was eradicated by the meltwater retreat. And when that retreat came to the Merrimack River Valley, the Paleo-Merrimack River Valley, there began to be a debris dam in Tyngsboro. And there was another in Manchester, or just above Manchester, and there was another one in Concord. And this became a great glacial lake. And as all of this material is streaming across the landscape, comes to the stagnant lake, and it drops out. It can't carry in suspension the gravel, the stone, the sand, and so on and so forth. So the great glacial lake is now still. And all the little silicas and aluminas drop to the bottom of the lake. And then something happened somewhere between 30,000 and 25,000 years ago. Something happened. They believe it might have been a breach in the dam at Concord, which created a hydraulic shock in the dam at Hooksett. It certainly created a shock at the dam in Tyngsboro. And the great glacial lake cut a brand new course to the Atlantic Ocean that it had never used before. It previously had gone to Boston. So the Great Lake drained, and now these settlers are coming in, and they find the clay that was deposited. Clay anywhere between 20 and 40 feet thick. An infinite amount of clay. And so they begin to make some brick. Pretty simple. They simply made a little box like this, and they tried very hard to make the brick uniform. And there was a reason for that, because if you wanted to calculate how much brick you needed for a particular project, you needed to know that it had some constancy in size. And so there were efforts, particularly by the Crown, to have a uniform size of brick. But still, depending upon what your brick was like, how well it was dried, and so forth, it would shrink, and so on and so forth. So there were variations. And originally, the bricks were pretty thin, then they became standardized. Now, the interesting thing, I think, is that what brick actually is ceramicized clay. and it had to be mixed with sand because the clay was too good. You can't make bricks out of pure clay. It just won't happen. They'll crack, they'll deform, they just won't do what you want. So they had to have the sensibility of how much sand do you mix with clay to get a consistency that's appropriate for brick making. Now, like any other good skills, it took someone who understood, a brick whisperer, if you will. How much water do we put in the clay? How much sand do we throw in the clay? The sand that's available to us, is it really like a good silica sand, or is it a little more coarse? Or all of these things had to be taken into consideration. And of course, firing the brick was something else entirely, because you had to have a brick master to fire your brick. Well, I mean, when somebody wanted to build a chimney, for instance, they're probably looking at maybe, I don't know, maybe 1,000 bricks. And they're like, oh boy, it's going to take me a long time to make 1,000 bricks. And when I make them, I still need to fire them somehow in a kiln or something. And I don't have that expertise. You had to hire a brick master. And so they'd simply, at first, throw some clay in the ground, and they'd throw some sand in the clay, and they'd have the animals tramp around on it, and so on and so forth, because it had to be tempered. A lot of the clay was so dense and so thick that only a frost cycle would allow the fibers to break up and mix easily with the sand and form the kind of brick mud that they really needed. Of course, later on, as things improved, I say later on, but not much later on, they would build what was known as a pug mill, which was simply a box about 4 feet square with a post in the middle with giant blades stuck into the post at various levels, much like a great large Vegematic, if you will. And they'd hire a horse to get on the pole and just drag that thing around and around and around and around until the clay and sand was mixed consistently. So as they began to really get into the brick making business, as opposed to farmers that just wanted to make a few extra dollars, they started this kind of enterprise. So they'd simply now take the mud, throw it into the various holes in the form. Generally, that's what you had, was just a little form like this. And then they would strike it off, screed it off with a board or shingle or anything else they had. And then they would give it a little shake and take it off, and there were the bricks. Well, it wasn't quite that easy. What you had to do, you probably had to take some old bear grease or anything else you had, and you'd make sure that you had it mixed with sand, and you'd coat the inside of your form with sand. And then, now you'd put it in, and when you gave it a little shake, it would come out. And that is why we have what's known as sand-struck brick. And if you look at each of these bricks, you will see the residual marks that are left by the tools that created them. Where it was struck on the top, where it slid on the side with some sand, where it sat on the bottom with some sand maybe. And if they weren't going to come out that way, you had to have a little extra water on hand, but you had to haul water to do that kind of thing. Water wasn't necessarily right at hand. But they would throw water on the top of the form, give it a good jiggle, give it a good shake, and the bricks would drop out. Now they were more wet, which wasn't desirable. Or at least in the making of the brick, it wasn't desirable, but in the usefulness of the brick, that's what's known as water struck. And that does make the finest brick for their particular intended uses. So, so now they've made, let's say they've made 1,500 bricks between Joe Farmer over here, Joe Farmer over there, and his cousin over there. Wouldn't really want his cousin, but you know, you got to take family in, right? So they get together. Now they hire the brickmaster, and he comes, and they dig a little trench, if you will, in the earth, about 20 feet square and about a foot, foot and a half deep. This was known as a clamp. And they would take all their bricks and they would build a little igloo, like a real igloo, 3 bricks deep. Boom, boom, boom. However many feet long. And along the way, they'd have to make a couple of draft holes in the top, and they would begin to fire the end of the igloo tunnels, and they would draft the heat right through these igloo tunnels of brick. This would go on for almost a week, depending upon how many bricks they had, how wet the bricks were, the green bricks, and ultimately they knew it was right when the smoke changed. It was, you know, like getting a new pope. They see a little white smoke come up, and it's like, oh, we've been waiting for this all week. There it is. Our bricks are done. We don't want to have to overbake them. We're done. We're good. We're great. So the inside of the tunnel was usually a brick like this one. You can tell it's misshapen. There's probably several reasons for that, but primarily that's one of the bricks that's going to be inside next to the fire. That's why it's black, overly ceramicized. And then you had the next brick. Now that one's baking nicely. That's really, really, really good. It's got all the right heat. And then you got the one on top, like this. And now this brick is going to be a little softer. This brick's going to be hard. This brick's going to be a little softer. And this brick's going to be like Goldilocks. Right? It's too much. So these are the bricks you'd use as backer bricks. These are the bricks you'd use as a finished brick. And these clinkers, that would be a brick you would use for your filler inside. So each brick had a purpose. It still had a use. But one served in its application better than another. And so they all had value. And in 1776, just as a round number everybody's familiar with, when you hired a brickmaster in Merrimack, New Hampshire, you were going to pay him anywhere between $250 and $450 1,000 to bake bricks. So you can see that it's hard to believe they could make a lot of money that way. And yet it was something everyone needed, everyone wanted. And they also, of course, made some specialty bricks, like this one, if you can tell. It's got a particular mold to it. This is a splay brick. This is what you would use to make a fireplace, where one brick would be on top of the splay brick like that. And you'd get the splayed angle here for your fireplace. And of course, later on, they did make a lot of other specialty bricks, but that was when things really got into the industrial age. And now you had the railroad operating. I mean, previously they had nothing except, you know, a few rafts. Maybe they could, you know, put some boats downriver, maybe even go to Newburyport and sell their brick, something like that. But now, past the age of the Middlesex Canal and into the age of the railroad, everything really, really, really multiplied. And they began to have machines that would press brick. It was always a matter of great conflict. The people took pride in their bricks, and they said, the pressed brick isn't as good as the handmade brick, and so on. And this is how the human element operates over time when various forces come into conflict with what you're doing and so on. So one thing passes and another takes off. But I will tell you that in 1816, when the river was opened up fully from Manchester to Boston via the Middlesex Canal, there was a rush order in Lowell for bricks. And the Erie Kittredge brick family brought to the landing in Reed's Ferry and delivered 100,000 bricks in one day. It seems like a Herculean feat even by today's standards, but people were willing to work. People knew what hard labor was. People knew how they had to survive, and they engaged themselves in the lowest labor, if you will, because they recognized that it still had dignity. It still had worth and value, something that relatively seems to escape us today. And so there was this great communal effort, if you will, to provide, even if it wasn't for them necessarily. I'm sure they would have loved to have had brick chimneys and brick homes, but they couldn't afford that. They could only afford to make what they had for a few extra pennies and send it all downstream to a growing river valley. And one of the things that I would like to really impart upon you, if I can, these bricks have all been touched by somebody more than once. I've touched them more than once. And I look for the bricks. I still look for bricks. That sounds a little odd, I know, but I look for bricks and I find cat tracks in them where they were green and the cat stepped on it, maybe a little skunk, something like that. I have bricks that have fingerprints. I wonder who that gentleman was. I have his fingerprints, but not his identity. But I know that he was a man of honest work and endeavor, and he came before me. I stand on his shoulders, no matter how laborious this work was. And if you take a brick and you put another brick next to it, and another brick next to that, and a few more on top, and you keep going, you have sidewalks, you have chimneys, you have foundations, you have industrial complexes, you have the great prosperity and growth of the American experience right here in the Merrimack River Valley. This is what people did. And we still stand on their shoulders. A common thing like this. A thing that most people wouldn't ever bother to pick up or think about. And yet, it's a part, an integral part of who we are and what we can forecast for our future. When a caveman knocked two rocks together, we should have been able to predict that we would put men on the moon. And that's the same as a brick. No matter how hard and illiterate this man may have been, he's the reason that we are here today. So, yes, sir.
I collect bricks from old foundations as well. And the ones I have are rather thin. A lot of them are not square, they're bent a little bit, and some even have rocks in them. The second question is, when I took down a house in 1800, the bricks on the inside of the house and the chimney I left outside after I took it down, and they all cracked from the frost and the water getting in. And the third question is, I have seen brickworks with thousands of bricks on a diagonal. What, drying? Why are you familiar with those pictures? It's like in brickworks, there's thousands of them all neatly lined up.
Well, those are green brick, and they would put them on the sand first, and this is what's called caking. You take the brick from making in the mold, you run it over, you put it on the ground, next to it, next to it, next to it, next to it. Oh, it's nothing to see in some of these old photographs and so forth. A few 100,000 bricks all lined up, a board on top of that, more on top of that, a board, more on top of that. Some of the more enterprising brick makers had a rudimentary shed to keep the rain off of them rather than just the boards. But when it rained and you had green brick out there, you might lose a small percentage or a large percentage of what you did because the rain will destroy it.
So how long were they supposed to be in the sun then to be put into the kiln? Or they be baked?
A considerable period of time.
Really?
Yeah, they wanted to reduce as much moisture out of that green brick as was possible, because the rest of it was going to be taken out in the clamp or kiln process.
What about the thin bricks?
Those are prior to 1752, when the Crown tried to establish uniformity. Now, obviously, some people on the frontier, they probably kept making those. Those bricks are generally considered to be the older New England bricks because they didn't have any particular need for the industrialized concept of uniformity.
Not too many were consistently rectangular. A lot of them are curved a little bit.
Well, they'd take a green brick, and it was so green it would be almost jelly in their hands. And they'd take it over and bake it in a location, and if it was left undisturbed, that would be fine. Somebody's got to pick that up again, take it over to the kiln, and when it goes into the kiln, if it's not set up right in the kiln, this brick is a good example because not only is this a clinker, but you can see where somebody picked it up with a clamp and distorted the shape of it long before it got into the clamp. So it's labor and the human element. People get tired, right?
The little rocks as big as peas or marbles, they're just, I mean, obviously it wasn't.
That's definitely just an early, small-scale farm operation where they were digging out the clay bank, and they didn't really pay close attention to having pure clay, and they didn't pick out the little stones or whatever, and they said it doesn't matter. And it just, it's kind of like the difference between a cake that you might buy at the bakery and a cake that your mother-in-law might make.
Well, I've been wondering about that for many, many years, so thank you.
Yeah. So, yes?
What is the percentage of sand to clay?
That was a delicate science. It was always different. Generally speaking, you're probably looking at something like maybe 10 to 15% sand. But again, it was what kind of sand is available, how wet is the sand, how wet is the clay, how pure is the clay, and so forth. So it's like so many things. People just got a feel for doing this and doing it right because they knew if they learned all these sensibilities, they could maximize their profit.
Can you use any water besides regular water to make bricks? Can I make bricks with salt water?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say no, but on the coast, they used a lot of marine clay, which was essentially the same as the blue clay of the Merrimack River Valley. But not quite. I do think the salt would have some other chemical reaction in the ceramitization of the brick and so forth. But
So if you did not mix the clay with the sand, is that the clay that crockery is made out of?
no, you actually have to mix sand with that to make it potter's clay as well.
Oh, okay.
And I have a broken brick here, which you can see the internal makeup if you're if you're interested. And I think this brick right here is an example, I believe, of not having enough mixture of sand in the clay, and it therefore reacted differently in the kiln. But it wouldn't stop them from using it nevertheless, because it's got a good face on it. But yeah, like all things, attention to detail and care and so forth. Yes,
I
sir.
got two questions. One is, I've seen a lot of local pottery, and it's like local pottery light tan. Why are bricks red? And the second question is, do they ever sun dry the bricks rather than kilns?
Well, technically, I guess you always sun dry it when it's green, and then you put it in the kiln. You
Okay,
can't use a sun-dried brick.
okay.
It's not going to hold up.
And for the red color?
And for the red color, for the most part, it's the iron that's in the water and the earth and so on and so forth that makes it red when it's baked. However, in Merrimack particularly, there were several brickyards that produced bricks of a varying color. And so, for instance, there was a place called where Anheuser-Busch is today, or was until recently.
Yeah.
They had what they called the kaolin brick, which was a little more pink, just a little bit different, and it's just because the iron in that particular area was just a little bit different. But oddly enough, when you baked these bricks in a kiln, and you got the clinker bricks, the finished bricks, and the backer bricks, sometimes the backer bricks were lighter in color, and they called them salmon bricks, because they were more salmon colored than fully ceramitized bricks.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Last question.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I built 2 brand-new chimneys about 20 years ago, and I bought brand-new bricks. And in 8 years, the chimney fell apart because water got into the clay and expanded when it's cold and destroyed them. So those bricks were not, baked hard enough? Because those bricks should be watertight, correct?
Yes.
Right. Well, by definition, the new bricks that I bought was not. So was it not baked?
The colonial settlers here used clay as a mortar. So you'll find in your oldest homes that it's all laid up with pure clay.
No, I'm talking about the brick itself.
Yeah. Then they went to a mortar with sand and lime.
Right.
And then they went to a mortar with Portland cement. The mortar doesn't hold your brick in place. The weight holds your brick in place. And so the exteriors always had to be addressed and retooled and so forth to keep them fresh. Your brick, I'm not sure. Any other questions? Yes.
Do you know if anybody's still making artist-struck work?
I imagine they must be. It probably means something a little bit different in the industrial processes of making brick, but yes, they probably are. They want
My
that.
understanding
They want that
was that
seal.
Vermont brick was the last water-struck brick producer in New England.
Well, and then again, with media selling and so on and so forth, right? They can call them most anything and get away with it, right?
Yeah, but I'm talking about the
Morin
real
does it,
New England water-struck brick,
Yeah.
which was a staple in restoration when it was available, or face brick.
It's hard to get restoration brick.
Yeah, business.
Yeah.
Morin Brick makes them in Maine. I know they make water struck.
Up in Maine, you say?
Yeah,
Morin Brick in Maine. I know they make water struck. I needed some for a project.
different than what I'm talking about.
So let me thank you all for letting me sweep up your time. I would like to say one more thing, simply because I enjoyed being here and listening to everyone. I'm the president of my local historical society, and we are deeply engaged in trying to build community around history and preservation. And I want you to know that each and every one of you is one of these. Each and every one of you are important with your story and what you have acquired over time. No matter how esoteric you think your interest is, somebody's studying granite. And people go, oh, what are you looking at granite for? Everybody knows what granite is. No, it's because there's a story everywhere, and the details are important, and only people like us are going to undertake that research, understand it, and hopefully find a jigsaw puzzle that it fits into. Because the guys at the top aren't going to do that work. What we do as individuals in preserving, understanding, promoting, and creating history is vitally important. And thank you very much.